It's Wednesday, November the 1st, 2017. Happening now, this is the EdTech Situation Room, broadcasting to you from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I am Wes Fryer, the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School, joined as always by the incredibly insightful and, deeply, I want to say something like researched and just, full of cards of evidence to cite back up what he has to say, Jason Neiffer. Jason, how is Montana tonight?
Missoula, Montana has freezing rain going on outside, which will turn to snow overnight tonight. And I think I can safely say that the Montana winter has safely hit Montana. So snow falling, and I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, maybe, but it's certainly dumping here in Missoula. Here, I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And I'm also the tech-savvy administrator in residence for the Northwest Council for Computer Education, where I like to talk about tech because it's cool.
All right. And I have to ask, as a point of personal privilege, Halloween, your exchange student's first experience, what was that like?
We mostly have answering the door. It's apparently not part of the culture at the high school he's going to here in Missoula to have a lot of students dress up, which is interesting because my understanding is one of the other high schools in town, every student dresses up hardcore. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But, I am doing what I'm sure most people are doing the day after. I have leftover candy that we're trying to get through tonight. It's an almond joy. I'm going to get through only good candy at the Neiffer James residence here in Montana. And then I'm pairing that tonight with a nice Trader Joe's Merlot. So for those of you curious about my wine cheap candy pairing, that's what we're going with tonight.
Only the finest culinary combinations here on the EdTech Situation Room for your, I'm sure that's going to improve our dialogue considerably. Well, welcome to our live viewer who's there. I will actually be opening up our chat window on YouTube, and we do invite anyone joining us live. There's somebody else who's joined in to please chime in on the chat room and let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and any questions and comments that you have. So you can find our links that we'll be talking about tonight, as always, at edtechsr.com/links. where there is an embedded Google document with, per usual, far more links than we will have time to talk about in a 60-minute time frame. You'll also find the archives both on YouTube as well as our website, downloadable from Amazon S3 as 360p, I think, videos that are about 200 megs for an hour. And that's actually pretty decent compression coming straight off of YouTube. And then also 32 kilobit compressed audio versions. So, Jason, where would you like to begin tonight's dialogue as we look at technology news and look at it through an educational lens?
Sure. I'd like to start with an interesting, maybe kind of techie article that I was pointing to last week that's pretty interesting. This is from Marco.org. Marco Arment's a fairly famous podcaster and developer that's developed a lot of interesting products, including being the lead developer of Tumblr, the guy that created Instapaper. He's been around for a while and certainly a welcome voice on the internet of expertise. But he wrote a really interesting article that I wanted to point to that I believe I got from the Tech Thing podcast, if I remember correctly, but it's called The Impossible Dream of USB-C. And as it turns out, I was going to bring a USB-C device. I'm actually on one right now, and of course I can't fold this around to point to the ports, but I want to talk about this for a second because I think that there is so much possibility in USB-C, and there is a 12-inch MacBook. 11-inch MacBook that has a USB-C port on it, and Wes, you're plugging in, what is that,
This, in order to get the standard USB, because you can't plug it in, This is actually my HDMI video adapter, which I don't leave home without if I want to plug in wired to a projector or a television. I also, use Apple TV and wireless, but this is definitely made for more of a wireless experience, not as many connections.
Right. And so for those of you unaware or have not purchased a device yet that has this wonderful innovation, USB-C is the successor to USB 2 and 3 and micro and mini USB, which are interfaces that, so for example, the micro USB is the core interface for most Android cell phones, at least it has been until very late. But the USB-C is the newer port in town. And slowly and surely devices are coming out with USB-C ports. And Marco does an extraordinary job of explaining how that despite the possibility and powers of USB-C, it has not been the panacea that advocates have talked about. And he mentions a lot of reasons why, but a couple of them. First, a lot of manufacturers, including on the Chromebook I'm on right now, have taken USB-C and eliminated any other USB ports, which means that you're down to just a USB-C or 2 port, which means that if you're going to plug in anything that's a more classical USB device, you need to buy, as Wes suggested before, a dongle to do so. In a lot of cases, USB-C becomes the power for a device, and so you have to then sacrifice one of your ports for a peripheral to power your device. And there is really, despite the fact that the ports are shaped the same across all these devices, your USB-C port could or could not have functionality in it that makes your port that much more useful. For example, not all USB-C ports have video out functionality for them. Not all USB-C have power capabilities, which means that you could plug in a powered USB-C adapter and not be able to charge your device because either that port or none of the USB-C ports have power to them. Some of them are 3.0, some of them are 3.1, some of them are something referred to as Thunderbolt, which is a super fast USB-C standard. And the devices that only work in Thunderbolt port, the Thunderbolt port don't work in anything backwards compatible. So this dream of having one cable that does it all, or 1 or 2 or 3 ports that does it all, has not been the case yet. And the reason why this was so interesting to me personally is because I've been exploring the use of my Chromebook, which has 2 USB-C ports on it, as a way to create a desktop utilizing a USB-C dock. And there are dozens of docks available. The generic ones apparently work there, but I found Dell makes a really beautiful Thunderbolt USB-C port that's actually runs about $200, but they're now starting to get used and refurbished pretty cheap on eBay. And last week I purchased one for $29, a used one, and it was delivered. And while it works with another laptop in our office that is someone else, another employee in my office's laptop as a port, because it's a Thunderbolt compatible USB-C Dell laptop, it doesn't work at all on any of my Chromebooks that have USB-C ports on them because it's not Thunderbolt ports. So I wanted to mention this because I could see the lure of a school starting to move towards and standardize 2 devices that have USB-C ports on them because it simplifies charging. It simplifies dongles. You could have one style of dongle that is utilized across a number of devices, but unfortunately, it's just not to be the case. And I'd mention one other thing about this. This is an HP Chromebook that I'm on right now, and this is the USB-C charger that came with this Chromebook. It looks like a traditional charger. It's hardy. It has a lot of watts, and it's pretty sturdy. But, it's bulky, right? Like, this looks like a laptop charger. It's inconveniently designed like a laptop charger. But I was able to go to to Amazon and purchase a $20 little USB-C brick and then buy a 10-foot cord for $11. And that's now my carry-along charger. It's tiny, it's beautiful, it's much longer than the HP charger, and it's really convenient. But even that, it puts you at peril because up until very recently, half or more of all the USB-C cables and chargers on Amazon were not up to standard. It could fry your device. Now Amazon's cracked down on that. But it's a really interesting phenomenon, I think, in the technology world. So, Wes, I know you have the thin, beautiful MacBook, the 12-inch MacBook. The 11-inch MacBook that I keep labeling, the 12-inch MacBook. What has your experience been as a USB-C user?
I think it's been okay, but it's still too early days. It's a little bit like the first Macs that lost the floppy drive when you still kind of sort of needed it. Apple has always been there at the bleeding edge of technology, and so I think that it's amazing. It's light. When I carry it around, people think I have an iPad, not a laptop. But for instance, I'm using my wife's MacBook Air to do the show. We've had a few issues, I think, related to actually the heat of the processor, and that's not just tied to the USB-C. But for my use case, where I'm typically taking this to meetings and able to connect wirelessly to screens, it's worked okay. But
Yep.
just like for tonight, I actually used it for another Google Hangout earlier tonight, and it required me to have the video adapter, and so it's not the computer for our teachers. To take the educational lens here, USB-C in my view still is a dream. That is a great article, and I love just all those technical details, because I hadn't realized all of those differences between them. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves, though, because one of the things I pulled up as you were talking were the tech specs for the latest MacBook Pro. So when Apple came out with this 11-inch MacBook, I don't know, but it seemed like they were kind of testing the waters to see, is that what they're going to stick with? And there was a lot of conjecture. We talked about this on the show, months ago, as far as, is the MacBook Air going to die? And, is Apple just, leaving the old USB behind? They do have, 4 USB-C ports, 2 on each side of the MacBook. And I know Ben Wilkoff is in our chat room, and I'm pretty sure he is probably, I know he's a big iPad user. I don't know. Yeah. Huh. Well, okay. He says he can use an iPad charging brick to charge his MacBook Pro, iPad Pro, and iPhone. Here's the one thing that has been super cool, and it is to that point. I was on the airplane on our fall break flying back home, and I was almost dead on my laptop. I have a 1200 milliamp charger that I typically use for my phone, and there's no way that can charge a laptop. And I thought, I have a USB to USB-C converter cable. I wonder if I can charge my laptop. And sure enough, that gave enough juice from that battery to keep my laptop alive. So from a cable compatibility standpoint, that is definitely a big win. But I don't think it's ready for prime time in terms of, the majority of users.
And, and I think the other piece of this too is that Marco makes this point in the article. Part of the problem here is that at some point this will be standardized just in time for us to have 4th generation stuff, right? And like that's part of the reality of computers, right? Like at some point, I'm assuming that my phone device will also be USB-C. I'm using a 4-year-old Android phone right now. I don't anticipate upgrading anytime soon, but I assume that with the kind of phones I buy, that my next phone will be a USB-C port. But then that renders literally every charger I own, except for the 2 or 3 USB-C ones I have, to be worthless, which means if I want to have the ubiquitous charging that I do have in my house right now, I'm going to have to move on from that. And then speaking of Apple for just a second, I've been really surprised that Apple has not moved to USB-C on its mobile devices. I thought that was a shoo-in for them. I understand why Apple might want to stick with their Lightning cable because of the investment into it, although they were kind of USB-C style before USB-C was cool, right? Like the Lightning really advanced charging cables very, very aggressively forward, as opposed to the market, which was not moving forward as quickly. But that is part of the peril here of these evolving technologies. As Mark Arment points out, at some point, we're going to want a thinner cable, and USB style C cables, they're, the end of it are pretty thin, and they're reversible, which is, I think, the killer feature on it, right? But the bottom line is that that's not a svelte cable compared to the Lightning cable, right? Like the end of that is very thin, and I'm sure at some point will be even thinner. So interesting to watch the market there, and certainly an interesting phenomenon that we're witnessing.
So I'll pick up on that, talk a little bit about phones. Dropped an article in about the iPhone 10. This is Business Insider from October 27th. Here's how many minutes you had to score a first day iPhone 10. And for the record, we have not made a decision in our family whether to do any upgrades yet. The article mentions that because there's so little difference functionally with 8, some folks are opting for 7, and we're honestly looking at that too to say, hey, how inexpensively, could we pick up a 7 if we need to go ahead and do that? In the United States, analyst Gene Munster found first-day iPhone X deliveries or iPhone 10 deliveries were sold out in 17 minutes and were totally gone in 38 minutes. So Apple is still certainly, creating lots and lots of buzz. But the article I am most moved by this week is actually the second link in the show notes right now. This is also Business Insider from October 29th. Google and Amazon are spearheading a quiet gadget revolution, and it's going to put pressure on Apple most of all. And so key points from this article are that Moore's law, and people have said this before, and maybe it's going to be wrong. Maybe quantum computing or whatever is going to, make it go on. But this is saying Moore's law is going to slow. And so, the exponential increase in processing power that we've seen over the past decades, which Apple feeds on and which cell phone companies have to turn things over because your processing power is so much better, phones and cameras. It's saying that Apple is going to have a harder time selling on that. And so the big change gadgets are going through is their dependency on AI and their dependency on the cloud. And so, Apple's bottom line as far as their profitability really is dependent now on the iPhone and how many of those they turn over per quarter and per year. And when it comes to Google and Amazon, Google's wanting us to see more ads and Amazon's wanting us to buy more things. The companies are motivated differently. And so the point that's being made in the article is that artificial intelligence, again, we talk about this, and our regulars may be tired of hearing us mention, Google's AI first strategy rather than mobile first. It's a really big deal. One of the articles linked in here, I put in as well, and it says a dormant chip in the Pixel 2 will soon let developers write better apps and AI apps. And so evidently with the Pixel 2, there are some issues with burn-in and there's some hardware issues, but this is a big difference in companies and capabilities and bets as far as where the market is going as a trajectory. I've had several conversations in the last week or so with folks about their phones and just about, how they can almost be self-sufficient with their phone. I mean, their tablet, if they have it, if they don't have it, but, can't imagine not having their phone. And so one of the personal things this really makes me consider is whether or not I need to take a look at a Pixel phone, if not now, as my next device, because of the AI revolution and what this is meaning for capabilities. Evidently, the capabilities of the Google Assistant even today are far outstripping Siri. So, Jason, you are the owner of a Google Home. Are you noticing changes in its function and its capabilities? And, what's your advice to me as the longtime iPhone user whose children will probably have heart attacks as teenagers if dad would, disrupt the pass down chain for phones?
Well, I think the transition for me, and I went from an iPhone 4 to my first Android phone was a Galaxy Note 2, then to an LG G3, then to one of the Amazon Moto phones, and then I went backwards a little bit because I wanted some older functionality that the Galaxy Note 4 provided, and so I'm using a Galaxy Note 4 now. I think part of it is that the reason why I still continue to be delighted by Android is because it does allow you a lot more controls to mess with the phone and do interesting things with it, right? I'm pretty sure I could be plenty efficient, plenty productive on an iPhone. In fact, I still have an iPad that I utilize because I want to stay steeped in iOS, and I want to be able to understand that platform, partly so I can support end users in that platform as well. But the bottom line is I'm very happy with my Android phone. But of the two companies, it does appear that Google is doing more with artificial intelligence than Apple seems to be doing right now. And part of it's because I think Apple, I wouldn't say they're getting lazy, because I think they are doing interesting things with phones. I just think that Apple is not they're resting on their laurels a bit, because they still are the premium phone and they're making extraordinary profits off of that phone. And it's not just because they're selling hardware. And I was going to put this article in today, and then I lost it and I couldn't find it again. But, you probably know as an end user, Wes, that Google is now the default search engine again in the iPhone. In fact, that involves it involves a payment from Google to Apple. And that payment represents it's billions of dollars. I don't know where that number is specifically at, but it's in the billions of dollars that Google pays to Apple, and it's all profit. Like I'm sure it was like 3 lines of code to change the standard from Google to from Bing to Google, and they just collect this money, and it's basically costs them nothing to make this profit, and represents a pretty significant percentage of their quarterly profit every quarter on that device, right? And I don't know. I mean, I'm almost certain, because Apple is a smart company, that they have a place somewhere else that we're just not seeing yet. Maybe it's a car, maybe it's television. There's a rumor of an Apple television kind of cable-like experience, yada yada yada. But I just don't feel like the phones are advancing in a way that Android phones are. Not from the hardware standpoint, but from the software standpoint. And that's where I think, there's likely some AI things in there that are coming.
How does all this relate to schools? Phones have been around for a while. I am part of conversations now a lot more centered around social media hazards and screen time and concerns. And we've got in fact, there's our middle school director was telling me, or principal was telling me about a movement that's like, wait till 8th grade. I need to find this out. But evidently there's folks, really trying to tell parents, don't just, get your kid that phone as quick as they can. There's actual benefits and value in waiting. So what does the status of the current smartphone market today mean for schools and devices? And how does this have an impact? Should this have an impact, Jason?
Well, I think that the battle royale for mobile devices in schools is between the Chromebook and the iPad. Like I obviously, kids are bringing devices in our classrooms. Those are probably Android devices based on market numbers, but you're going to see a pretty diverse mix between those two. And because the app stores are largely similar, if you're relying on students to bring a phone in that can run an app, chances are either platform is going to run the app you need. Where I do think schools will be impacted, though, is in the tablet world, as people attempt to roll out tablets as an accessible computer for students to utilize in a classroom. Your choices there are the iPad. I've never been a tech director, but I know enough to know that iPads have been challenging to a lot of tech directors, because the implementation and rollout of those is not nearly as clean as the Chromebook. I think it's a different game in 2017 than it was in 2012. So there's lots of third-party options, and Apple seems to be getting their stuff together. Although I will say, if Apple had been smart in 2010 when they released the iPad, if they had put even a little bit of engineering energy into creating management systems for those that were school-friendly and compatible, the iPad, and I honestly believe Apple would be kicking the Chromebook right now, right? If they had got their foot was in the door much earlier, right? Google's really struggled in finding their foot in schools with tablets, because every time they've attempted to put an Android tablet into place, it hasn't lasted very long. And I don't really know how to account for that. I find Android tablets to be quite functional. And when you have one that's decent hardware, and the Android OS, I think it's just fine, but they haven't caught on for whatever reason. And in fact, there was Google Play for Education, which was a play on Google's part to provide a management interface for Apple tablets. And for Android tablets. And the bottom line was they never really took off, like, even though they had really wonderful management features. So now the play is not between Android tablets and iPads. It's between Chromebooks and iPads. And the reason why is because the Play Store, which is now available on a handful of Chromebooks, allows you that same experience of pushing out apps. And because most Chromebooks, even the education world, being sold 2016 or beyond, are convertibles, they allow for a flip around experience that gives you a tablet-like experience. I now have a handful of Chromebooks that I utilize, from very low end to very high end, that have the Android Play Store, or I'm sorry, the Google Play Store for Android apps, and it's a wonderful experience, right? The Android apps with a laptop-like experience. And I keep wanting to lift this Chromebook up that I'm on right now to show it to the camera, and that's impossible. I guess I can show you the keyboard. So there's the...
Oh, and he shuts his machine down as he's trying to show us the keyboard. So yes, folks, you saw it here. While Jason is getting reconnected, I will preview the fact that, speaking of Chromebooks, and here he is joining in again, a remarkable demo, the Demo Slam. I can shut down my machine with ease.
That was maybe the dumbest thing I've ever done. So, and that's a competitive field too. The dumbest thing I've ever done. So
that was a feature, ladies and gentlemen. That's a feature.
It was. It shuts me up, right? So, the bottom line is that experience could be competitive there. And with Chromebooks being rolled out so aggressively in schools, I think that's the piece. So, I think we're a better world if both OSs are vibrant and being sold. I think the devices are better for it. But I think it's going to be interesting how this plays out in schools.
So 2 thoughts on that. Mentioning Chromebooks, we are going to be doing a show about the Chromebook, and that will be in part a specific response to Gary Steger's article of a couple weeks ago that was pretty negative about the Chromebooks, to say the least. And I think I'll be writing a post about that in advance and getting some thoughts together, because I am a real fan of the Chromebook, and I think there's all kinds of creativity that can be had with a Chromebook of 2017, certainly compared to an OLPC Generation 1, which I'll bring to the show because I actually have that in my garage. But the other thing that I want to throw down here, because Ben Wilkoff, I think, is in the audience. Ben was one of those staying up late, getting his iPhone 10, and what did he say? It's going to be coming in on Friday. So I challenged Ben to convince me that the iPhone 10 is a better upgrade for me than the Google Pixel 2. So care to accept the challenge? It's definitely for folks enjoying being on the bleeding edge. The feature set that's available on new devices can be remarkable. I just continue to think about the AI side of all that. So perhaps it's all still early days. We're in the caveman, cave person days of AI. So it may not just be that dramatic. All right. Well, let's see. I'd like to. I think. Let's talk some new media stuff and Russia and Facebook and all of this stuff. I dropped an article actually above the new media links, how Americans really feel about Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, Twitter, and more. And this is a Verge article from October the 27th. And there's been all kinds of, obviously, discussion about fake news. And I had an interesting talk with my 8th grade right before the show. She's writing about the Gilded Age, but we were talking about stuff that's happening, in our press with not just local and national. So we are not trusting Facebook today. That's the main infographics there. Says 4 different findings. Number 1, Apple is not America's favorite tech company. Number 2, America doesn't trust Facebook. Number 3, Amazon is the ruthless corporate juggernaut people love, and a third of America wouldn't care if Twitter disappeared. Interestingly, Twitter probably has its highest profile ever, thanks to our president, who enjoys making foreign policy, and whose advisors, I guess, have been incapable of taking the device with the Twitter account from his hands. I remember how Barack Obama, was reluctantly giving up, I think, a BlackBerry or some other kind of phone, and anyway, social media. So to see trust levels, there's a whole graph on how much people trust their bank versus these other companies. At one point, Mark Zuckerberg, when he was doing this nationwide trip, I mean, people were wondering if he was going to be running for president and, what he was going to be doing. So I thought that article in this whole genre of the tech companies and what's happened with elections and things was pretty interesting. And then this one was really interesting too. This is from The Verge, and this is in that section. Russia's social media, and I think you dropped this one in, Jason. Russia's social media meddling could spell the end of online anonymity. This is from today, November the 1st, in The Verge. And this is absolutely fascinating because amidst everything else that's happening and going on, from Google, Facebook, and Twitter in front of House and Senate subcommittees this week. And there's a person who testified there named Clint Watts. He says he's one of the most respected figures in the nascent field of social media manipulation. And his quote sounds like it's, straight out of a spy novel. But he's talking about how anonymity is very dangerous in terms of electoral manipulation. And a lot of the really dark stuff that we see in social media and is because of anonymous trolling. And so that whole quote there, he says, with features like account anonymity, unlimited audience access, low-cost technology tools, plausible deniability, social media provides Russia an unprecedented opportunity to execute their dark arts of manipulation and subversion. Today, anonymous sites rife with conspiracy theories such as 4chan and Reddit offer unlimited options for the placement of digital forgeries to drive Kremlin narratives, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's implications for schools in terms of who we trust, right? I mean, we're a Google school. We're trusting Google. Thankfully, we're able at our school to order from Amazon. At my previous district, we were highly discouraged from doing it to the point where they just didn't want us to do that. I don't know how that is shifting as far as business offices and things like that with schools. But those were two notable articles in terms of trust, and then also that whole idea of anonymity and whether that's worth defending, and how that plays into politics and all that is pretty interesting stuff. So anything you want to glean out of those articles or others under that category, Jason?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage you, and again, all the links to in our show notes are at edtechsr.com. Look at the articles that I think we quote a Verge one, but if not, it's all over the internets today. The tech media has jumped on top of this, but during the congressional hearings related to Russian meddling in elections, where they focused on social media, looking at both the advertisements and then also the fake groups that were created by so-called Russian meddlers to influence the election. The thing that's most stunning to me is that, obviously Russia didn't create the discontented discourse in the United States. It's been in existence for a decade or more, certainly with the election of Barack Obama in 2008 and the rise of the Tea Party. I do not want to minimize that we've created a lot of our own problems here. But if you look at the ads that have been attributed to Russian meddlers, what's interesting about it is that they very cleverly have built memes that would be shareable and kind of a bit quote Abraham Lincoln in the reverse, looking at the opposite of the better angels of our nature, to the worst of humanity, to the worst of the discontent that exists in our culture, to the worst of politics, and took advantage of that by then stoking those fires, oftentimes picking on strong beliefs by people, whether they were religious or political or social, and then once drawing you in with a cleverly created meme, would then feed you disinformation for the purpose not of having you even vote for one candidate or the other, but just to rile up your hate and discontent and your extraordinary dislike of the other side. There was one of the ads focused, and I can't remember the name of the group, but put this bizarre looking meme that had a caricature of Jesus and Hillary Clinton and said, like this if you want Jesus to win, and really breaking America down into just terrible caricatures of ourselves, right? But we know that that's how memes work, right? That's social content, that's spreadable content. And in a world where, we can't help ourselves. And it goes back to a topic we've covered a lot, that these social media systems are built around addiction. They're built around gambling. They're built around the same guttural response we have to politics, right? It is everything we've been talking about to be weary about with these technologies, gone wild. So definitely take a look at those advertisements that have been mentioned as part of these congressional hearings.
And I'll mention another article that I put in at the bottom of that section, and this is from today from The Verge. Apple CEO Tim Cook says social media is being used to manipulate and divide us. And so this is an interview that he did, I guess, tonight with Lester Holt on NBC Nightly News. And he did talk a little bit about the congressional hearings, but he said, quote, "I don't believe the big issue are ads from foreign governments. I believe that's like 1% of the issue. The bigger issue is that some of these tools are used to divide people, to manipulate people, to get fake news to people in broad numbers so as to influence their thinking. This, to me, is the number 1 through 10 issue." And that echoes what you're talking about, Jason, the fact that people are being riled up. We are perceived to be a very divided nation, and we need to look at the ways that these tools are being used and the role that regulation needs to play. And of course, when we talk about changing the internet and net neutrality and privacy and anonymity, these are important, kind of core principles that have undergirded the internet since its inception. But that article I mentioned a little bit earlier, which was talking about Russia's social media meddling could spell the end of online anonymity. If we start talking about you can't be anonymous, the article says that Facebook has already been moving in that direction, and they could probably kind of control, tighten down their verification processes as far as having a user account. I don't know, we can get a little dystopian here with, having our little badges. And it's kind of weird. Right now, I talked on the show for my Geek of the Week a couple weeks ago about this little USB, security device where with 2-step verification, instead of having my phone text, getting a text message or using the authenticator app, I can put that in, and so here I am, plugging in to verify my identity. And how soon, Ben Wilcox, folks, is going to be there on Friday. His iPhone 10 is going to be, facial recognition. He's going to be in the database. Homeland Security is going to be zeroed in saying, all right, we know how to get Wilcox now from all of our cameras around the country. No, perhaps that's a step too far. But anyway, it moves us to these ideas about you need to have a mark and a number in order to do business in the world. And it's pretty interesting because I think that hopefully we're going to need to take some action because of what we've seen happen with the election. My 8th grader was evidently not aware that the Russian involvement in our election by a lot of consensus, may have subverted our democracy. So anyway, we were having interesting conversations about that. Hopefully we're going to take some action, because I've read enough, both nonfiction and fiction, about intelligence communities, and I could show you parts of my bookshelf over here of reading that I used to do, especially in college and afterwards, and the ways in which foreign governments, and we do too, like we've played these games in foreign countries, all over the place. Look at some of the Bernie Sanders speeches that he gave and that were on his channel, and some of his awareness about Mohammad Mossadegh and 47 in Iran, and different coups and things like that we've done. So anyway, it's being done at a much broader level with social media tools, created and made right here in the US of A in Silicon Valley. And I guess one of my thoughts might be that we need to be taking a look at how we're discussing these things in school, right? We have fake news as a common term that people are kicking around, but I think a lot of our curriculum, it may be classically tied, and hopefully we're helping kids learn to be critical thinkers, but there's some really, really important stuff to grapple with here. In fact, there's an article that talks about the 4 questions posed to the, let's see if I can find it. Well, I'll pass the mic to you, and then I'll find this other article and comment on it.
Sure. The other thing I would also point out is that we approached this last week a little bit, and I think it's something that I'm hoping inspires conversations in schools. But it feels like 15 years ago, we were having a lot of really great conversations and curriculum discussions about media literacy. And I do spend a fair bit amount of time in schools, and there's an endless amount of things we should be focusing on in schools. So don't get me wrong, that I'm sure that instruction has been replaced by something less valuable. But the bottom line is that good old-fashioned media literacy instruction could go a long way to do some important work here in regards to helping students figure out ways to engage with these materials. The fear I have, however, and I've been thinking about this a lot more lately. There was an article you posted a couple weeks ago, Wes, that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, but there's some rumors going around that Facebook will start charging news sources to publish news on Facebook. And the reason why that sparked my memory now is that I do think the problem with Facebook in regards to using it as a news source, and this is also true of Twitter, and maybe you can even argue it as part of the internet's problem, is that everyone does get equal time in your news feed, right? If you follow a reputable news source and you follow one of these, kind of fake AstroTurf groups, right, that is advocating on behalf of a view, but it's really just trying to push you memes in order to get you to think one way or the other. If you've liked each 3 times, for example, you're going to see those roughly equally in your Facebook feed, and they all appear to be roughly equal, right? And that's especially when you're talking about a student, maybe a younger student, maybe someone that doesn't have the discernibility that others do. That's a real problem. And I think we are getting to a point where we have to think carefully and critically about this. And I don't know how you teach that. I don't know how you build that skill set, but we've introduced that into our culture. So now we got to do something about it. And by the way, that was one of the attitudes that several members of Congress brought to the hearings today. Listen, Facebook, listen, Twitter. You've invented these technologies. They are ubiquitous within our culture. No one's going to take that away from you. But if you can't figure out a way to help, at least limit the open access to people that are up to no good, we will step in and do it for you, right? It was the overt threat of regulation. And, I don't like regulating speech. I think it's dangerous. I think it sets dangerous precedents in our culture. But golly, I just said the word golly, we got to do something about this.
So I did find the article. It wasn't in there, and I dropped it in. It's from Medium, and it's the channel by the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Research Lab, catalyzing a global network of digital forensic researchers. And the article is titled 4 Questions for Twitter, Facebook, Google, and Everyone Else. Hearings for How We Can Cure Social Media Without Killing Them. And so I think this was set up either by folks that are, I think they're lobbyists or think tank or whatever, but to influence the congressional questions that were being posed to Twitter, Facebook, and Google, interestingly, on Halloween. And so here are the questions. Number 1, what is your platform designed to do? Question 2, what is the limit of anonymity on social media? Question 3, do you have a right to be forgotten? And of course, we've heard a lot about that from Europe. And I think Europe has really led the United States with this in perhaps being more proactive, looking at needed regulation instead of just a complete laissez-faire approach to what internet companies are doing. And then the very last question, can the committee commit to collective action? And the first sentence there says, in many ways, the threat of Russia's influence operations via social media are a forcing function for undressed governance challenges growing like weeds in a rapidly evolving information environment. These are great debate topics, right? Like this would be awesome if you're going to, have some kind of parliamentary debate or, something where people are going to maybe not have to, do a summer's worth of intensive research and case writing to be able to debate issues. I may actually talk to our debate coach about that. But I think that these kinds of issues have been thrust into the mainstream because of the election, because of what's going on with our president and with our nation. And we need to find ways to help students thoughtfully grapple with them, because while Congress may take some action, I mean, these issues like privacy, online anonymity, to what degree should advertising be regulated, and whether that's political advertising or other kinds of advertising. These are big issues, and they're not going to be resolved anytime soon. So I would say ways to let students grapple with these would be great, whether that's a writing prompt, whether that's some kind of class discussion relating to current events. It'd be interesting to see. Newsomatic is a current events app and website for kids that my wife uses and has used for a while. And I don't have it. Maybe I'll get it for a Geek of the Week coming up. There's another website that one of our sixth grade social studies teachers uses. So anyway, definitely talking about current events as a way to bring this in. And I think these are hugely important things to wrestle with for us as citizens and taxpayers, and then also as educators, as we have students wanting, hopefully engaged in what's going on in the world and what we should be, advocating and recommending. Because legislative bodies behind, right? They're never going to be ahead of the curve when it comes to technology and technology policy. But it seems like we're going to be having something come out of these hearings because of the gravity and scale of what has transpired in the last year with electoral politics.
Well, Wes, I think I'm going to take us out of the realm of politics. I found a fascinating article a couple of days ago from Android Authority that notes that Samsung has created some proof of concept projects that turn 40 Galaxy S5 cell phones into a Bitcoin mining rig. And this is not a story about Bitcoin. This is a story about Samsung's really interesting movement to essentially release open source software to unlock old devices. So that means taking the necessity of having their Android software off of there, and then allowing old tablets and old phones to turn into devices that could be useful in Internet of Things projects, and then turning old devices into new things that do new stuff. And their proof of concepts included an old Galaxy tablet that they turned into an Ubuntu Linux tablet, and a old phone they turned into a fish tank monitoring system. And I thought this was the best news, because one of the problems we have right now is that we keep throwing away old devices, right? A lot of power users will turn over phones every year and a half, every 2 years, every 2.5 years. Those devices oftentimes aren't that useful because they don't get security updates anymore, or the software itself is dated, which means you can't install apps on them that are in any way modern. But if Samsung is giving away software that unlocks those devices and allows you to install Ubuntu or other Linux-based things, or a Raspberry Pi-like operating system, those could turn into extraordinarily interesting Internet of Things devices. And it reminded me, actually reminds me right now, and I need to figure out this link and throw it in, but there are some nonprofits that are working on putting in listening devices in the Amazon rainforest for people that are coming in. And I think I can't remember if they're poachers or what the situation is, but they've taken old devices and solar powered them, and then have them sending off listening device information to help stop people from doing illegal things in forests, right? Imagine the millions of phones that we essentially throw away by throwing them into a drawer until they finally become e-waste, that we could give to schools, put into a maker lab, and do really cool things with them, because they are essentially computers that are powered modestly with batteries. So I thought, very interesting thing. And man, would it be cool to take, dirt cheap, under $50 5-year-old cell phones, pull the operating system off of there, and do something else with the platform.
That's awesome. What a makerspace project, right? What a great, hack, remix, and repurpose And it is we want to do Google expeditions with younger students who don't have their own phones, and so we've been collecting phones recently. I say we, our lower division elementary computer teacher has been collecting, and I'm just assisting in helping set up the phones with our mobile device management, and updating the software and putting Google expeditions on it, and found that the iPhone 4, we learned this with two-step as well, will not run iOS 8, which is evidently it is required for the Google app and even to do two-step verification. So you really do not, and Ben, check me on this, and Peggy and anybody else if I'm wrong, but it appears that you can't do two-step verification with Google with an iPhone 4. And in order to run Google Expeditions, you have to run iOS 8. So anyway, we've got some iPhone 4s that have been donated, and it's like, what do we do with these? Well, Apple would do something, like Samsung in this case, and open it up, which is not likely. I guess you could jailbreak or do something like that, but that's a pretty awesome article.
Yep, I thought so too. Well, Wes, it appears we're getting near the top of the hour. Is there anything else you want to throw in before we Geek of the Week it?
Let's see. No, I think we've covered most of the ones that I wanted to take a look at. I guess we could just, we've got the surveillance and state power. I had thrown this one in a little while back. This was The Verge from October 10th. Google's Home Mini needed a software patch to stop some of them from recording everything. And evidently, I think reading the article, they had set something on top, which would press a button, which was recording things and sending that out. So I'd still like to follow up on the case about the Amazon Echo and whether, the court, how all that was going to play out as far as the appeal, for the recording. The other article that was under that, just to get this out of the way, was October 21st. Federal court ruling, U.S. government is free to seize your fingerprint to unlock your Apple devices. And this is something that is pretty interesting with U.S. law. I don't know how this works in other countries, but in the United States, if you have a numeric passcode, you cannot be compelled. I mean, I guess they could try at customs, but I don't think that they can compel you to disclose that because somehow that is considered protected. But if you have activated, thumbprint recognition, or Ben Wilkoff and others with the iPhone 10, the facial recognition, then supposedly that's something that law enforcement can force you to do. Not that, we're all concerned about that happening to us, but these things are important to follow in terms of what their limits are as far as government and state power and, Fifth Amendment rights and all of that kind of stuff. So I have not bought my Android phone for Egypt yet, Jason, but I got a really good used device store that I am going to wander into maybe this weekend and see what I can see. So what is your Geek of the Week for today?
Well, this is probably a throwback because I'm sure we've mentioned this tool before, and it was actually the first time I ever saw someone do something interesting with this was US, but IFTTT, or IFTTT, is like an Internet of Things operating system, and basically IFT stands for if this, then that. So in other words, if something happens, something else happens, and there are dozens of ways that I use IFTTT in my life, including at my workplace. We've built a very delightful but duct tape and baling wire data analytics system that sends emails from our learning management system to a Google account. IFT sniffs those emails out, parses the data into individual parts, and then turns that into data spreadsheets that we utilize both visually and from a spreadsheet standpoint with schools that want up-to-date data for their or about their students. We've even created grading analytics scripts that allow us to see how quickly assignments are graded after they're turned in, because we wanted a way to visualize that so we could analyze how that process worked. And we really love IFT, but the reason why IFT has meant more to me lately is because IFT plugs into both the Google Home and the Amazon Echo. Both devices are in my house as part of an experiment that has to do with my doctoral research, and they allow you to do some really cool things. And so right now, if I said, okay, then the G word, and said, add to my shopping list X, it would put it onto a to-doist list that my wife and I share with our shopping list. And so what's been interesting, as I mentioned before on the podcast, we have an exchange student this year who is an 18-year-old football player. The kid eats like you would not believe. We run out of stuff all the time. And so we've had to, any of the three of us can constantly update our shopping list by just talking to our Google Home. So the reason why I was reminded of it this week is because Lifehacker released a quite wonderful guide to IFT, and so if you're new to it, it's pretty great. So highly recommended the Lifehacker article. And IFT is just a really cool and amazing and I think mind-bending tool that would be useful to, I think, you as an educator, but also your students, especially if you've got a makerspace that you're utilizing.
Absolutely. Ben had shared a few weeks ago or a month ago about, somebody locally that was writing some algorithms to find out about local microbrews, and somehow that was being connected with if this, then that. And, I think it was a Google Home. When we have the ability to write and create some kind of algorithm that is going to be interacting with our, digital assistants, that's something to gravitate to and to help point students to, because at that point, students are taking some agency over it. It is interesting to see what you can get it to do and what its capabilities are, but that doesn't involve the computational thinking that's involved with coding. So my geek of the week is ScreenCloud. This is digital signage. We have had a couple years of using what is touted as free digital signage with digitalsignage.com. I'll be writing a blog post about this in the hopefully not too distant future. But Google has Chrome Bits, which are little $85 computers, really just like a Chrome box, except it looks like a large USB drive, except it has HDMI at the end and a single USB port. Putting these Chrome Bits out, and I think we might have 7 of them out in different places with digital signage. We're going to be using it for our G Camp OKC this coming Saturday on November 4th. And it's very cool the way that it integrates with Google Slides, with YouTube. You can actually use different kinds of devices with ScreenCloud, like an Amazon Fire Stick or even a Windows PC if you got something small and whatever. But we've been using them with the Chrome Bits, and it does cost educationally $15 per screen per month, compared to what we were doing before. We paid like $165 for these Android devices, but we couldn't update them beyond Android 4.4. I don't know if they got hacked, but we were having trouble with them pulling down all this data that was confusing. Like, why are they doing this? And anyway, ScreenCloud has been awesome. It is a revelation. I'm really loving it. And the way, the responsiveness of being able to change a slide, doing a multi-layout thing, which we haven't done a whole lot with, but like we can do weather at the bottom, and you can have an Instagram feed or regular RSS feed. We're going to be using it to share Google Slides at our Google event that we're going to have, our conference, and then also have some things timed. So like at 11 o'clock when it's time to go to the cafeteria, our 3 digital signs that we have are going to immediately say, please head to, Calvert for the 11 o'clock session, etc. So love that. Jason, where can people find you online to just continue the good education that you provide so generously throughout the week?
Well, I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach, and I blog fairly frequently at the Tech Savvy Teacher blog for the Northwest Council for Computer Education, blog.ncc.org, where we announced a couple weeks ago that Dan Rather will be joining us to keynote our conference in February. So we're really excited to work with Mr. Rather and to have him talk a little bit about his work on topics we talk a lot about, which is where journalism is going and how students can better analyze the extraordinary buffet of information around them to try to make sense of this world. So that's February in Seattle. The 14th to the 16th is the NCC conference, and more about that at www.ncc.org. What about you, Wes?
So I am W. Fryer on Twitter. My blog is speedofcreativity.org. Even though I wrote a recent post of an ode to RSS and daily blogging, I am not back into a daily blogging mode, but I am writing a little bit more, and did write a post this recent weekend. We had a really exciting Minecraft Halloween challenge that was, very, very popular. with the kids, and we had waiting lists to get on it. We're going to do something else for Christmas. I do also, though, want to mention the hashtag GCampOKC. We'll be having about 120, maybe 140. We've got about 25 slots that we can still fill, but educators descending on our campus on Saturday, and I'm really looking forward to great presentations. Peggy, I'm going to try to set up a live stream in one of our rooms that we'll see how that goes. We'll probably do that with an iPad, and hopefully have some good Google goodness that will be shared there. And want to give a shout out. I think I probably will put up a post about this. A lot of times you have demo slams at Google events and ed camps and things like that. And so we're calling this the Google Glimpse. So a little quick story that if you want to share, and I'll put out a call if Jason, you want to share a quick little video, Ben, Peggy, anybody else who's listening. These are just something quick, but it would be cool to have a few video based ones to share, and encouraging people to be connected educators. So we are the EdTech Situation Room, generally here on Wednesday nights, streaming to you live at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, and whatever the UTC might be. We love to hear from our watchers and listeners, and so please shout out to Jason or I, or you can shout out to us at Twitter at EdTechSR. We'll see that tweet, and we'd love to know where you are and if there's anything in particular you would like to hear us cover on the show. You can find those show notes at edtechsr.com/links, and the best way to find out what's going on is to just follow us on Twitter, which is EdTechSR. We'll be doing an upcoming show on the Chromebook, but that may still be another week or two away. And we hope until next time, everybody stays savvy and stay safe. Thank you to our chat room for your dialogue, and we'll look forward to hearing Ben's report on the iPhone 10 coming to a YouTube screen near you.